Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the surprisingly high-stakes world of plum tree pruning. It's this perfect, crazy mix of science, art, and honestly, some pretty ruthless decision-making. Because the cuts you make in your garden this season, they are absolutely going to dictate your harvest and your tree's health for years to come.
But before you even think about grabbing those shears, consider this. Did you know that pruning your plum tree in the dead of winter can actually kill it? Or that skipping a simple 10-second cleaning step with your tools can spread a devastating, incurable disease throughout your entire garden? Well, it's true. Pruning when the temperature drops below -5 degrees Celsius literally causes the cambium, that's the living tissue inside the tree, to freeze solid, which just kicks the door wide open to lethal bacterial infections. And unsterilized tools? They are the #1 spreader of the dreaded plum pox, also known as Sharka. So how do we avoid these fatal mistakes and guarantee a massive, healthy harvest?
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our masterclass agenda for today. First, we'll cover why and when to prune, then tools and preparation, followed by step-by-step pruning. Next, we'll compare strategies for young versus old trees, tackle health and diseases, and finally, wrap up with some expert secrets for a rich harvest.
All right, starting off with Section 1, why and when to prune. Because when it comes to trees, timing is everything.
Pruning isn't just about making the tree look neat and tidy. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a living art form that balances leafy growth with fruit production. And I absolutely love this quote from the experts at AgroClub. It says, "You are not a lumberjack, but a surgeon." When you walk up to your plum tree, I want you to assess it like a doctor assessing a patient. You're only removing the parts from the organism that are actively harming it or holding it back. By cutting away the unnecessary, you're quite literally stimulating new life and energy.
And if we break down the pruning calendar, it reveals something totally crucial. Unlike hardy apple trees, stone fruits, like plums, are super sensitive to the cold. Late winter and spring pruning definitely stimulates aggressive growth, but it carries a huge risk if a late freeze hits. Summer, or what we call green pruning, is fantastic because it controls that wild growth and literally forces the tree to pump all its nutrients directly into the fruit. And finally, post-harvest pruning allows for fast healing while the sap is still moving, which perfectly prepares the tree for its winter rest. So for plums, late spring or summer pruning is often far, far superior to making deep cuts in the dead of winter.
Moving right along to Section 2, tools and preparation. This is all about hygiene and precision.
We just talked about acting like a surgeon, right? Well, a surgeon is only as good as their scalpel. Your essential arsenal should include guillotine shears for perfectly clean cuts on smaller branches, long-handled loppers to give you that much-needed leverage on thicker wood, and folding saws with curved blades for those tight, hard-to-reach spots deep in the canopy. And hey, if you have a massive orchard, battery-powered electric shears are an absolute lifesaver. But the absolute key takeaway here is sharpness. A dull blade crushes the tree bark instead of cutting it, and crushed bark? That is an open invitation for bacterial cancer and gummosis to invade your tree.
But sharp isn't enough. They have to be sterile. Here is your mandatory, non-negotiable preparation checklist. First, physically wipe the soil and sticky sap off your blades. Second, prepare your sterilization mix. According to safety sources, you want to dilute a maximum of 1 cup of bleach into 4 liters of water. Seriously, do not use more bleach than this. Step 3. Dip your tools in this solution between cuts, especially if you're dealing with a diseased tree. And step 4, and this is crucial, rinse the tools with clean water immediately after. Bleach is highly corrosive, and if you leave it sitting on the metal, it will completely ruin your expensive shears.
Okay, Section 3, step-by-step pruning. Let's look at the actual architecture of the tree.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the specific shape we're aiming for. Once our tools are prepped, we become architects. For plum trees, the gold standard shape is called the improved tiered crown. This is a pruning system specifically designed to create a structurally robust tree with beautifully spaced horizontal branches. And why do we want this? Because it maximizes sunlight penetration to every single plum. Now, this architecture doesn't just happen overnight. It takes a solid 5 to 6 years of disciplined pruning to fully form. But it guarantees excellent light distribution and the mechanical strength needed to hold up a heavy harvest without the branches just snapping off.
So, how do we make the actual cuts? Here are your golden rules. Always angle your cuts at a minimum of 45 degrees. This stops rainwater from pooling on the wound. Next, cut just above an outward-facing bud. This is a brilliant little trick. You see, the new branch will grow in the direction the bud is pointing. So by choosing an outward-facing bud, you naturally force the tree to grow outward, which opens up the center of the canopy to the sun. Also, never leave hangers. You know, those ugly little stubs that just sit there, rot, and invite disease. Finally, if you're removing a heavy branch, cut it off in smaller pieces first. If you try to cut it all at once, the sheer weight will snap the branch early and it'll peel a huge strip of bark right down the side of your trunk.
And here is the final, arguably most satisfying step of the shaping process. Once your tree has reached the desired height and those tiers are formed, you cut the central leader, that's the main vertical trunk, down to a lateral branch. This stops the tree from endlessly growing upward into the sky, which, let's be honest, makes harvesting a total nightmare. More importantly, it ensures the top of the canopy isn't shadowing its own fruit down at the bottom.
That brings us to Section 4, young versus old trees, because we absolutely have to adapt our approach based on age.
Remember, a tree is a living organism, and its needs change drastically as it ages. Think of young trees in their first 1 to 5 years, a bit like teenagers. Your job is aggressive architectural shaping. You're carefully selecting the 3 to 4 main side branches that are going to carry the weight of the tree for decades. You want to do this in the spring to really aggressively stimulate shoot growth. But for older trees, your approach completely flips. It becomes all about gentle, light maintenance, ideally done in the summer. You're simply thinning out deadwood, removing branches that cross and rub against each other, and just making sure air flows nicely through the canopy.
Now you might be thinking, okay, I don't have to worry about old tree problems for a long time. But look at this number, 5. Believe it or not, heavy-yielding plum varieties like the famous Stanley plum pump so much energy into making fruit that they exhaust their vegetative growth incredibly fast. Because of this, they might actually require a harsh rejuvenation cut as early as year 5. Let's pivot to Section 5, Health and Diseases, focusing heavily on prevention and treatment. Pruning isn't just about shape and fruit, it's literally your first line of defense against orchard-destroying diseases. And the absolute worst enemy of the plum tree is Sharka, also known as plum pox. This is a viral disease, and it is completely incurable. If your tree gets it, you have to uproot the entire tree and destroy it. No exceptions. It's spread by aphids, sure, but more commonly, it's spread by humans using contaminated pruning tools. This is exactly why I emphasized that bleach sterilization step earlier. It is absolutely non-negotiable if you want to protect your garden.
So, to keep diseases at bay, follow this sanitary pruning checklist every single time you approach the tree. First, remove all mummified fruits. Those are those shriveled up, dry, zombie-looking plums left over from last year. If you leave them on the branch, they guarantee that a fungal infection called brown rot is going to destroy your next harvest. Second, cut out any witch's brooms. Those are dense, tangled clusters of weak twigs caused by stress or disease. Third, eliminate root suckers, the little shoots growing out of the base of the trunk that just steal energy from the main tree. And finally, never leave diseased wood lying around on the ground. Burn it or bury it far, far away from your orchard.
And just to hammer home that critical environmental rule we discussed at the start, -5 degrees Celsius. Never, under any circumstances, prune if the weather is colder than this. The frost will literally bite into the fresh cuts, kill the cambium layer, and invite severe bacterial canker. Always, always wait for a dry, slightly warmer day.
Finally, we reach Section 6, Secrets for a Rich Harvest. Time for the final touches.
All right, let's bring the energy back up. We've protected the tree, we've shaped it beautifully, now let's talk about the reward. If you want those massive, sweet, juicy plums, here are the expert final touches. Incorporate summer green pruning. By snipping off excessive non-fruiting leafy green growth in the middle of the summer, you stop the tree from wasting energy on making leaves. This redirects all those incredible sugars straight into making the plums sweeter and larger. Next, pair your pruning with a solid spray calendar. Ensure you're applying post-blossom fungicides to protect those tiny new fruits. And a real pro tip, apply a post-harvest spray right after you pick the plums. This prevents gray mold from ruining your hard-earned fruit while it's sitting in storage.
Just a quick, important note before we finish up. This explainer provides general best practices derived from agricultural experts. However, if you're dealing with severe, unidentified diseases or managing a massive commercial orchard, you should always consult a localized professional arborist.
And that brings us to the end of our masterclass on plum tree pruning. You now know exactly why timing matters, how to make the perfect outward-facing cut, and how to defend your garden from incurable diseases.
Now that you have the mindset and knowledge of a surgeon and the sterilized tools of a master, the only question left is, which plum tree will you step out and transform first this season? Get out there, be precise, and enjoy the incredible harvest that follows. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.